Hello. This week is the first full week of Lent, and this week we'll be exploring the kingdom come as the kingdom of abundance. In 869 BC, King Ahab came to the throne in the northern kingdom of Israel. Much like all the kings of Israel, he was a terrible king. Ahab's big problem was that he was distracted. He was influenced and seduced by the gods of his wife, Jezebel. Jezebel is famous for being one of those really evil characters of the Bible, and she definitely lives up to her reputation. She had all of the prophets of Yahweh gathered up to try to silence the word of God in the land of Israel. And as she gathered them up, she had them tortured, she had them imprisoned, she had most of them slaughtered. Among those prophets was a man named Elijah. Elijah is the paradigm of what a prophet of God should be. He's the guy that John the Baptist wanted to be when he grew up. The story of Ahab and Jezebel and Elijah is one of the most fascinating and detailed stories that we have of any life of a prophet in the Old Testament. Just like all the other prophets of Yahweh, Elijah was under threat from Jezebel's culling of the prophets. As we explore this story during the days ahead, we'll see that Elijah was somebody who had incredible faith in God. He was able to escape the violence that Jezebel and Ahab were bringing onto the prophets of Yahweh. Under the surface of this story, behind all of the acts of violence on Ahab and Jezebel's part and the great mighty acts of God, like fire falling from the sky, we see a tension start to rise to the top. And that tension is between living a life of scarcity or living a life of abundance. In other words, seeing life as something that is full of things that are of limited access, things that you need to grab onto, clutch onto, rather than a life where God is always providing, always giving, always making sure and ensuring that his people and those who are faithful have what they need, not only to survive, but in order to thrive. And yet, so often, we find ourselves with this attitude of scarcity, as though we're going to run out of the things that we need in order to be faithful disciples of Jesus Christ. So we grab onto and we cling to and we clutch and hold so tightly these things that we think we're going to run out of. We end up taking on the same kind of attitude that Ahab himself had when he is trying to manipulate and finagle his way to accessing and grabbing and collecting things that he did not even really need. And then in contrast with Ahab, we have Elijah. He lived his life with a fundamental understanding of God's abundance. Elijah's story is full of the acts of God's abundance. Whether he is living on the side of a river and having birds bring him breakfast, or he is in a hole in a mountain waiting for God to speak, living in the home of a widow and her young child who barely had 2 sticks to rub together, much less enough food to provide for her family, or a guest like Elijah in her home. And yet, seemingly out of nothing, God provides enough food for this family and Elijah to survive. And even when the unthinkable happens and the young boy gets sick and dies, God provides the abundance of life in bringing a young child back from the dead. Like I said, Elijah's story is packed full of just the awesome acts of God's abundance. And it helps us to remember that God has always been and always will be a God of abundance, that the kingdom come, the kingdom that we are waiting for, the kingdom that we are living into is a kingdom of abundance. As Jesus Christ himself said, he came to give us life and life abundantly. And he reminds us that when we begin to live our lives through the philosophy of scarcity, when we begin to see our lives as something that is scarce, when we begin to see everything around us as something that we need to hold on to or cling to, that we just need to let go and not worry about the things that God is so ready to provide for us if only we ask, if only we seek, if only we knock, if only we seek first the kingdom come in Jesus Christ.